Hey everybody, welcome back to Football Talk with Vinny. In today's video, it's going to be essentially part 7 of the 8-part series where we go over division by division, just off-season plans of what each team in that division can do. Now, as you can tell by the title of the video, we're going over the AFC North, so let me get right into it. So we're going to start off with the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers right now are $19 million over the cap. So again, as kind of the theme with these videos, most teams are over the cap and most teams are in that same position. They're going to have to either restructure some deals or cut some guys to get under the cap. Now, they're obviously in a really weird spot because with Ben Roethlisberger, he does have a cap hit of $41 million if he stays with the team. If he decides to retire, they actually save $19 million on the cap. So again, if Ben were to retire, they actually don't have to restructure or cut anyone. They're already at the cap figure there. Now, a lot of news through ESPN and some other channels have been talking about if Big Ben were to return, maybe he should just re-sign a much cheaper deal to give the Pittsburgh Steelers some luxury in terms of having some cap space to maybe sign another guy or two. Or just not having to cut some guys or restructure some deals to get over the cap, right? Because if he returns at that $41 million figure, they will be $19 million over the cap. And again, you're going to have to cut some guys, which will make you less likely to be able to win a championship, right? If you're getting rid of guys. Or they'll have to restructure some deals. But if he were to take less money and they were to restructure those same deals, that would free up $19 million. You can now use that $19 million to sign a guy or two to really help you go all out kind of this last year if you're Big Ben and win a championship. Which again, you know, look at a guy like Tom Brady, even though he's still playing at an elite level, he took $25 million from the Bucs. He probably could have got more from other teams. So, you know, if you're Ben Roethlisberger, maybe you look at that and you say, you know what, if I just rip up kind of this contract and take a smaller long-term deal, or maybe not a long-term deal, but maybe a 2-year, $50 million deal, kind of like what Brady did, you know, you give your team the ability to sign another guy or two, which could help you put you over the edge. Now, as far as their free agents are concerned, you have guys like Bud Dupree and Villanueva, the left tackle. So you do have some significant pieces that are free agents that you would like to bring back. Again, you're in a situation where it's going to be very tough to actually bring them back. But if Ben Roethlisberger takes less money, maybe you're able to bring both of them back. You know, as far as the draft goes, I think obviously if you lose a guy like Bud Dupree, you definitely want another linebacker to kind of supplement the fact that you're losing him. If not, I think if you're Pittsburgh, you maybe go offensive line or maybe just best available at that point because you do have a pretty talented roster from top to bottom. So again, not really much to talk about with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I guess the only other interesting note is if if Ben Roethlisberger were to retire, what do you do at the quarterback position at this point? Right? Yes, you're going to save $19 million, but that puts you right at the cap. So now you're going to have to free roughly $10 million just to bring in a veteran quarterback. I guess maybe you could sign a guy like Andy Dalton and hope he takes a lot less like he took with Dallas. He may take a lot less because he would be the starter in Pittsburgh. So maybe you get away with signing a guy like Andy Dalton and he's your starter. Which at this point in their careers, I'm not sure if Andy Dalton is an upgrade over Ben Roethlisberger, the way Roethlisberger played. But also then again, the fact that Andy Dalton played for the Cincinnati Bengals, do you want to bring in a Bengal into your team? I think, you know, obviously with the rivalry that they have with not only Baltimore, but Cincinnati, you know, and I guess now Cleveland, now that Cleveland's finally a competitive team, you know, do you really want to bring in a guy that started for the opposing team at quarterback for the last 9-10 years? So next, we're going to get into the Baltimore Ravens. So even though the Baltimore Ravens, I think most people would assume they have the best talented roster from top to bottom, they actually have $18 million of cap space to spend. So unlike most teams, they're actually been very good with their cap. Now, obviously, in a year or two, when you give Lamar Jackson his big money, you won't have that. So if you're the Ravens, you really have to try to maximize these next 2 years and try to win a championship while Lamar's on a cheap deal. You literally saw it if you're the Ravens with your own quarterback. When Joe Flacco was on his cheap deal, you were able to surround him with a lot of talent. And once he won the Super Bowl, you gave him the big deal and you weren't able to put as much around him and your team struggled as a result. Now you got some pass rushers that are free agents, Yannick Ngakoue, pretty sure I'm saying his name right, and also Matthew Judon. So some guys that maybe if you were to re-sign one or two of them, it might take up most, if not all of that $18 million. Now, again, I think re-signing them would probably be a good idea, and if you don't, you maybe look to sign some guys on the defensive line on the free agency market. I guess your other choice is if you decide in the draft you're going to use that to kind of address the D-line spot, you're going to use maybe your first and your second round pick on D-linemen. Maybe you let those two guys walk, and maybe you use your free agency to sign some wide receivers, which, I think if you can add in a guy like a T.Y. Hilton to your roster, right, it's a deep threat with some speed, and he can go nice to pair with some of the other receivers you already have. And again, you have to start giving Lamar Jackson some better weapons to throw to. I think it's kind of not fair to judge Lamar Jackson when you don't really have many weapons on the outside. Now, obviously, if you want to really swing for the fences, maybe you could bring in a guy like Allen Robinson, right, who is a younger player, and he is a very good player. He's a Pro Bowl caliber wide receiver. You bring in a guy like him, obviously that would be most of your cap space. And now when you bring in a guy like him, you definitely have to use your draft to really address the rest of your roster. But also, I think one interesting note to take is are there going to be a lot of wide receivers that are going to want to play in Baltimore, right? Obviously, it is kind of a diss towards Lamar Jackson, but he's not the best thrower of the football, right? He was last in the league this year in passing of the entire NFL. Of all 32 teams, the Ravens were the last team in pass yards, right? If you're a wide receiver, yes, you want big money, but you also want a lot of stats. You want to be able to put up big stats so you can get another contract. And I think there's going to be some wide receivers that maybe don't want to sign in Baltimore, just for that simple fact. Now, again, you could use it as the reverse and say, okay, well, Lamar just doesn't have many weapons, which is why they're last in passing, which again, I, agree to some point. But again, when you're talking about free agents and guys making decisions, that might be their decision, right? As a receiver, they may say, I just don't want to sign in Baltimore because they just don't pass enough. So it may be a situation where you have to use your money in free agency to sign other players on your roster, and you may use the draft to kind of bring in some wide receivers. So next, we're going to talk about the Cincinnati Bengals. They have $37 million to spend, so they are in that top 10 range of money to spend. So first, we're going to look at some guys that are free agents on their own team that maybe you want to re-sign. Guys like William Jackson, AJ Green, and Carl Lawson, right? All three kind of make sense to sign. Obviously, with William Jackson, it's a cornerback. You definitely need some help on that defensive side of the ball. With AJ Green, you maybe could think about maybe letting him go, but again, he's still a pretty decent wide receiver, right? And if you re-sign him, obviously it depends on how much money he's going to want. But if you can get him on a semi-cheap deal because he is an aging veteran wide receiver, I think it's a good idea because it helps with your depth at the wide receiver position. And then obviously with Carl Lawson, I don't think any team could ever really benefit from letting a pass rusher go. So with all that cap space, it would kind of be beneficial to sign a guy like Carl Lawson. So now when you sign, whether you sign one, two, or all three of those guys, you're probably still going to have some cap space. So some free agents that I think is a good idea to sign. I think maybe adding another wide receiver if you don't get AJ Green kind of makes some sense there. Also, maybe a guy like Leonard Williams, if the Giants do not re-sign him. He was an interior pass rusher that did play very well over the last year and a half. And again, if you're the Bengals, if you can improve on the defensive side of the ball, I think it's, always a good thing to kind of help, obviously, Joe Burrow out. Because if you can get some stops, you don't put as much pressure on Joe Burrow to have to score 30 points to win a ball game. And then I think a guy like Levante David makes a lot of sense too if he is able to hit the free agency market. That's a linebacker that kind of could control your entire team, right? He can be the leader of the defense, kind of make those adjustments when the quarterback's kind of audible out of their plays. And I think you can never really underestimate having a good linebacker, in the middle of that defense. Now, as far as the draft's concerned, obviously they do pick very high, so I think taking a tackle makes a lot of sense, or maybe a guy like Kyle Pitts to give yourself an elite tight end / wide receiver at that position. So, definitely if you don't sign AJ Green, I think Kyle Pitts makes more sense. But again, just for me, I would rather take the offensive lineman. But again, it doesn't matter as long as the player you take is a good player. I think that's all that matters. But if you think that both players are going to be multiple Pro Bowl players and all pros at their position, I'd rather take the tackle. Give me the guy that's going to protect Joe Burrow so he doesn't get hurt and he doesn't get, rattled as he's getting pressured in some games. I'd rather take that guy rather than the wide receiver. But again, the Bengals have obviously a few different options they can go in. But if you're a Bengal fan, you have to love the way that not only Joe Burrow played, but the team was playing last year. And you have to hope that obviously progress just continues and you're maybe able to be a fringe playoff team. Because now, obviously with allowing 7 playoff teams, I think there's more teams that feel they're in it. So lastly, we're going to talk about the Cleveland Browns. So with Cleveland, they actually have $20 million of cap space to spend. So for a team that was as good as Cleveland was and made the playoffs, won a playoff game, almost won 2 playoff games, it's pretty nice to have $20 million to spend on some players. Now, as far as free agency goes, in terms of their guys, they don't have many guys that are going to hit the free agency market that you would think they would want to re-sign. Maybe a guy like Olivier Vernon really is the only guy really that kind of comes to mind. But again, if you sign him, he's kind of an older pass rusher now, so he probably won't take up too much of the cap space, so you should have enough to sign another player or two. Or if you do let a guy like Olivier Vernon go and the Ravens don't sign a guy like Ngakoue, I think that would probably be a good free agency signing, try to get another pass rusher opposite of Myles Garrett, right? And you kind of saw in Jacksonville, Ngakoue was a pretty good pass rusher. Obviously, he was playing along a pretty terrific defensive line with Calais Campbell and some other guys. But again, I think if you sign in Cleveland, if you're Yannick Ngakoue, you're kind of in a similar situation where Myles Garrett is going to get most of the double teams, if not all of them. So now you're in a situation where you're signing with a team where you're going to be single blocked on almost every play, so you're able to put up some big numbers. And then obviously, I think another interesting point is, are they going to trade Odell Beckham, right? Obviously, Odell Beckham is a good player. He's a Pro Bowl caliber wide receiver, I still believe, but does your offense play better without him? And I think it's a good question. When he got hurt, your offense was playing good throughout the season, but your offense was still playing good when he got hurt. So you could realistically say, okay, well, what can we get for Odell Beckham? And can we use whatever draft capital we can get to maybe improve the defensive side of the ball? Which, if we improve the defensive side of the ball a little bit, we'll have a more balanced team. If you're Cleveland, you're clearly a running team. So do you really want two wide receivers that are that talented when you're just going to be running the ball as much as they're running it anyways? I feel like if you're Cleveland, you can kind of get by with just having maybe just Jarvis Landry. And if you could trade Odell Beckham and maybe get a first-round pick or a second-round pick for Odell, and now use that draft capital to draft on the defensive side of the ball, now you're able to get stops on the defensive side of the ball. On offense, you're a very good running team, so you're able to chew the clock, shorten the possessions. You have enough skill positions there where Baker can make some throws and you could still, score some points if you need to. And again, as far as the draft goes, if you don't trade Odell Beckham, I think obviously taking the best available is a good idea. Probably more so I would lean to the defensive side of the ball, because again, I think your offense is already pretty elite. Especially if you keep Odell Beckham, you have two Pro Bowl wide receivers, you have a Pro Bowl running back and Baker Mayfield. Offensive line is pretty good as well. So I think probably just drafting the best defensive player. Whether that's corner, safety, D-line, or linebacker, I think any of those positions could really help your football team out to where you can become a more balanced team. So that's it for today's video. Obviously, just one more video to come on this whole series. So I look forward to making that probably in a day or so. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I look forward to putting that video out. And again, if you liked the video, make sure to like it and also subscribe. It does help the channel out a lot. And thank you guys so much.